Hello, everybody. I wanted to record a new type of video education here for us to help hopefully catalyze some more progress. It's called Exploring Elegance. In part one, this is an introduction and a breakdown of one of the components. So what is elegant? Well, so the definition is, look at both of these two definitions: pleasing, graceful in style and appearance and manner. And then of a scientific theory or solution to a problem, pleasingly ingenious and simple. So that's pretty interesting, right? So when you think about it, there's elegance, the look, elegance, the math. You put them together, and that's what architecture is. At least that's what you know architecture by that we're looking at here. So when we think about elegance, I'm often inspired by people who I think are elegant thinkers. This is the man who discovered the computations for gravity, Isaac Newton. He has the calculation of force equals mass times acceleration, F equals ma. It's amazingly simple, right? And his belief was nature is pleased with simplicity, and nature is no dummy. So here's another quote about exploring exactly what does elegant mean, and I love this quote, and I didn't even know who this guy was, but let's look at this quote for a second. Something is elegant if two things, if it is two things at once: unusually simple and surprisingly powerful. So this is a quote by Matthew May. I was like, who the heck is this guy? Well, it turns out he's written these books: The Elegant Solution, In Pursuit of Elegance, the Simbui strategy. I don't know what that is. And the laws of subtraction. I love that. So clearly, I need to read this guy and what he's writing about. So for me, I felt compelled to write up, what does elegant mean to me? And these are broken down into 10 kind of phrases that I stitched together. So step one is to sort of examine a phenomenon that's commonly occurring. So it's not, you don't look for rare phenomena, you look for commonly recurring phenomena that prevents people from acting or acting the right way, acting the productive way. Not from doing stuff, but not from generating activity, taking action. Breaks it down into parts, analyze each part from many different angles, factoring in people's perspectives, then synthesize all of that information into something consumable that resolves the phenomenon. So sort of kind of full circle, right? That's kind of my view. And if you break it down, it's basically going left to right. There's the science part, there's the tediousness, the discipline, and the analytical part. And then there's the art part, the lightness, looseness, and creativity. You need to have a balance of those. And I think one of the things that's getting caught up around the axle is when to be sciencey, when to be arty. How do we blend these things, and that we are blending and what we're actually blending? But we're not going to do that unless we're actually doing. So what I want to do is frame out. I want to pick one of the things that's elegant, or I consider elegant, and break it down for you. So as you know, we see this sphere. You guys have seen this before a lot. On the left, your company's world is complex. On the right, your client's world is complex. In the middle is conversations. I don't know if you've seen the bottom part where you take all these little dots, these components, and you start trying to make connections, all the different permutations of connections across these dimensions. And what you get is this blurry mix, this blob, and that blob, creates what we call productitis, or this huge amount of unmanaged complexity. It might even be ambiguity. And sometimes you can see this little dirt ball here. We've represented it before in different ways. It would be useful to go through and organize this. Like, how do we make ambiguity more clear? The more clear we make ambiguity, the less of a problem it is. If we just call it ambiguity, it's still ambiguous and it still has power. How do we name the villain? Name our villains. So the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, the more we name it, the more we can deal with it. So as you can see, there's a lot of these different variables here. Too many cooks in the kitchen, excessive bureaucracy, measuring the wrong things, blah, 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 lack of clarity. It would be wonderful if we could get down through what your reactions are to all these, and can we expand it? Can we make it mutually exclusive before we start simplifying all of that? So what's interesting is what's in the middle? What is the translator? What is the elixir, if you will, to this unmanaged complexity? And frankly, it's an outcome. And we've been talking about outcome a lot. How are we making outcome clear? And how do we actually use? So we have the outcome wheel. Why are we not using it more? How can I help us use it more? So I think first step number one is to help us understand it more. So we have this outcome here in the middle. So what's behind the outcome? Well, guess what? All of these things that we've been learning about recently, the economic theory of value, psychology, communications theory, systems thinking, sociology, experiential learning, and complex adaptive systems. So let's break it down. Here is our outcome wheel. These are the components of it. It's an achieved end state, executive owner, high-level initiative, measurable result, impacted stakeholders. Why is it color-coded the way it is? Why is it laid out this way? Why is it represented in a wheel? Well, let's cover off on that. So one of the challenges that we have to address is when we bring this wheel to life, we have to recognize that the overwhelming majority of the company's operating model is designed around product. And I think this picture here, we're not remotely paying enough attention to how heavy it is and how much work we have to do to help see people and then start filling in and making things tangible. This is why we need to create slides. We have to create slides to make the ideas that we're running into, things that we think are, oh, that makes sense. We've got to make slides for it to make it more contextual for everybody else. So what this picture represents is that currently the CEO and CFO have the income statement and all the other financials that they have to report. Part of what they have to report around is by products, and they have to report revenue. And there's a revenue recognition rules that they have to follow. There's the business reporting process they have to follow, the budgeting process they have to follow, and then they have to reconcile all of their budgets, all of their books. And I think it's incredibly important that we understand how that happens so that we can understand why there's so much tremendous pushback on trying to introduce outcomes or new ways of thinking. The other thing too is the companies are organized around products. Like we just can't just willy-nilly say, oh, productitis, and then people are going to get it. Their entire company is organized that way. And each business unit thinks by individual product. They just use the word outcome, and we have to make outcome way, way, way more tangible, concrete, and accessible for people. So the trend here is that customers are looking for what's possible, which is what an outcome is, which is why we're trying to make the work with Acuvia way more concrete about create demand and things like that. But really, if a client doesn't see what an outcome is going to be, aka what's the value they get out of things, rather than the stuff that they get for the individual products, there's just going to be friction between these two worlds. So this is the best I could do with my own graphics to sort of represent and zoom in to what the current operating model is. And as you can see, we're struggling with it because a lot of us are so comfortable working in a product-based way to do tasks and get our checklist done, and it's how hard has it been for us to engage in a design thinking way? Well, imagine ourselves as members of a massive bureaucracy of a $12 billion company. We just have to be way more empathetic and understand what's really happening. So this is the backdrop, and this is what we're going to have to be able to communicate. So let's go and talk about why outcome is that it's represented there in our wheel at the middle. Well, one of the design points of all this stuff is if an outcome is ultimately what an individual person wants, and and a buying committee, buyer group, whatever we want to call it, if that's what we want, well, that's really the atomic level of what our design point is around a communication system. Our design point isn't salespeople, it isn't contracts, it isn't anything other than what is an outcome? What is the information required? Now, contract is the closest thing because that's where the terms of what a client is willing to pay versus what they are expecting to get from the customer. But we're never going to get access to the information anymore because once a contract, the terms and conditions and all the stuff, all the things that are negotiated, all that information really is lost. We're not going to have access to it, and asking for that information is going to just be too much friction for the size of companies that we're going to want to sell to. So there's more information here about what's behind this, and if you think about a conversation to get to an outcome, there's really two things that are happening to pay attention to. There's the positive and negative energy. That's the interactions back and forth, the co-creation of value that follows this whole idea of electrical current. And this is where we get the whole idea of focusing on energy from, and what the flows are, and we get rhythms from this, and um, um, cadence, rate, speed, all of these things are natural flow is through like an electrical current inspiration. And then also there's the bidirectional change of information. So if you look at the three things that are going on here, we've taken, if you go and examine model map match and or audience message messenger, and you break down the communications theory that we've broken down in our things, it also matches very well the whole electrical current construct. And that's by design. This is intentional. We are intentionally designing these connections to as many things as possible so that our tools become synthesizers. They become not the musical instrument, flock of seagulls fans. No, it's the tool to synthesize a lot of different information in order to simplify in a real world setting. So that's incredibly important, just understanding behind what's behind an outcome. And if you think about this very simple picture, a lot of work and energy went into this simple picture. And it's useful to use it as a design point in everything you do. There's the I want, that's the green for the customer part. I have, these are our capabilities we want. And the second you move off of this simple model, you've lost sight of your design point. But look at how simple this is. This circle here, that circle there, that's the atomic level, the individual conversation to get an outcome with as many people as possible is our design point. So here's an exercise. Right now, jot out, or hopefully you're comfortable enough now to just do this on a recording without digesting it, without sleeping on it. Just react now. What could I have done? What did you not know from what I told you before? What could I have done to make these connections clearer? And how much of that do you think it matters to be successful? How much more do you need to know in order for you to start making slides? What is it? What's preventing you from taking action? Okay. I need you to know that. And I need you to say, here's what I need. Just say it. Like, don't study it. Don't feel mopey about it. Just say it so we can just get through this. All right. Now, the next element of the construct. Why is there a gray area surrounding this outcome? Is this a record? What does it look like? What does this look like to you? Well, in this area, one of the things that's really fascinating is I have not yet learned how to communicate all of the things that we're looking to do, because in reality, a sales conversation is in the three-dimensional reality, the three-dimensional world. And when we publish things in PowerPoint or we write up things, we only have two-dimensional space with which to represent them. The other thing too is the picture that I see of all the connections is a sphere. A three-dimensional object about all of the different parts. It's a sphere, so it can fit nicely into all the other spheres so that we can organize it. It's not a flat linear plane. It's not a box. It's not anything else but a sphere. And what's interesting about that is, lo and behold, what's at the middle of this? And how can we challenge ourselves more to use the orchestration orb in order to understand an outcome? Are we trying to go into details to focus on steps? Are we trying too hard to look at an output format? Why aren't we, how about we challenge ourselves to use this orb? We keep seeing it over and over again. How often are we talking about it? How often are we forcing ourselves to put it in slides? Who puts it in slides the most? Think about it. How often do you put it into slides? How often are you challenging yourself to use this in order to untangle the complexities around you, in order for you to produce an outcome? What outcome are you responsible for producing? What does this all look like? Here's another interesting relationship. If you notice, and you can go search this, this is Dan Harmon has simplified a story wheel, and he's got 8 parts to it. Yes, we're going to have another video just on that. We're going to talk about it a little bit. But look, he's got 8 different points. He calls it a wheel. I think he calls it a wheel. What's interesting about his explanation, he can get into more detail of it, but basically, a wheel is circular, a wheel is natural, a wheel is holistic. But the other thing about a wheel is it creates symmetry. And that's one instinctive thing about human beings. Something is not elegant unless it's got symmetry. So what actually is symmetry? Symmetry is the balance between things. Symmetry is the balance between, so all what's interesting about humanity, there's this duality that exists in all human beings and all humanity. The duality of man, to where we can put people on the moon, but yet we can trash the planet. That's a duality. The contradictions of human beings, the contradictions of the things that we create. We are surrounded by contradictions. And humans know this, and we're able to balance that because we're able to see a path forward that has that balance of that duality of man. And that's something that's incredibly important. And you do not get to it. Nothing is elegant unless has that you can thread the needle between that duality. And the only way that you're going to do that is if you work it through. And working it through is like telling a story. What's another interesting observation is, surrounding this outcome is another sphere. We've talked about complex adaptive systems. Look at all these different sub-sciences underneath the banner of complex systems. There's game theory. Interesting. Maybe we should explore what game theory is. There's nonlinear dynamics, a chaos theory, or bifurcation, iterative maps, attractors, blah, 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 blah. There's systems theory. Entropy, we've learned a little bit about that, right? There's pattern formation, or really just understanding what patterns are in the first place. Do you know what patterns are? Can you describe them? Then how do you know whether or not we're pattern matching? The more patterns that you publish, the more we can pick and choose which ones are the right ones. That's part of the seeing process. There is evolution and adoption, sort of the whole emergence idea. There's networks and how things are interconnected. There's collective behavior. How a group reacts is very different than how individuals react. So that's another interesting thing that we have to factor in. So this is just another example of, sort of complex adaptive systems. And we have that video where we talk about all of those things with agents and how those agents make information and the rhythms and all that stuff. Everything in it is baked in to this outcome wheel. The other thing that's interesting about that wheel is part of that duality of man is also, how does man communicate with each other? How do you break things down to such a way that people can communicate with each other? The top picture is a representation of the English to English translation problem. And what we've learned how to do is to adopt the storyboarding process. Now, we haven't gone through and followed this approach with discipline. The more we try to use the elements and talk about it, the better off we're going to be. It just is a fact. But there's a natural story progression that we can map out. In this case, I mapped out sort of marketing's responsibility is envisioning success. Sales is about empowering a champion. Delivery is about execute the program, and service is about enact change. I don't know if that's the right thing or not. But if you plot this out, there's motivation for change, there's insight, there's agree to explore, and then there's 3 steps along the way there. There's a kickoff for where the program begins, project success. I mean, we can map all these things out. We just talk through it. What are the steps? And don't get distracted by other variables. But this is all of the stuff that goes into unraveling and using the outcome wheel as a, basically a complexity decoder ring, a VUCA decoder ring. So here's another interesting thing about the outcome wheel and the sphere. If you think about all these different dimensions and all the things coming out of it, and you think about it growing out into a sphere, hopefully you can see as you start building upon it, the more you talk about an outcome, the more you build upon an outcome, the more you accelerate growth from inside and out, just like a chain reaction. When you don't talk about an outcome, we're talking about basically products. We just don't realize that that's what we're doing. So here's another interesting thing. The growth strategies came from this outcome wheel, putting outcomes in the center, and then thinking about all of the different ways that you can create different kinds of outcomes, and then what the growth strategies are. Isn't that amazing? No wonder it's getting traction in Acuvia. We've been on message all along. All of the derivative works are all built, are sub parts of this kind of thinking. So you don't need to learn all the details. What you need to do is learn to invest in the things that come up in the webinars, because those are the core things that we can all build from. I meant to delete this slide. I'm sorry. This one too. Yikes. Okay, so exercise. What do you think I could do to make these connections clear? Now, remember, we're just talking about there's the green circle in the middle, the atomic level. Now, the space that orbits, the kernel of the outcome. What do you think I could do to make these connections clear? And how much of it matters for you to be successful? I need you to say you to be successful, because you're a pattern of a person. And the more you talk about yourself, lead with you, the easier this is going to be, and we're going to make accelerated progress. The more you talk about how other people are going to think, or what you think other people are going to think, guess what? It slows progress down to almost a standstill. Okay, so what are these things now? In our construct, why do we have these things? Well, these things are spokes, and these spokes are really there designed to provide structure, and it's symbolic. It's symbolic because if you think about what we're dealing with, we're got to have to confront this one way or another, that we're dealing with a shift. Remember that picture that we had earlier on about the challenge between what's possible and not? Well, customers increasingly value what's possible, possibilities, and they value less products. Yet companies, the value communication system is set up in sales and marketing departments. So I've been spending an enormous amount of time on really understanding how am I going to communicate this marketing and sales, and how you're going to communicate the existence of how the stuff exists. Because if not, Acuvia has nothing to sell. Nothing. There's nothing. Because if marketing's going to always look at the world through marketing lens, and sales is always going to look at through the sales lens, if we can't find ways to or free ourselves from that construct, we're always going to be prisoners to a mechanical linear operating model. And then we're never going to be able to exit the velocity and be sucked into the black hole of product. And more importantly, all we are is going to be pains in the ass to our clients. It's basically free ourselves from the sales and marketing construct and what we expect and expectations of this and that and whatever, and work on coming up with our own model. In order to sell what's possible, we have to execute a value communication process. It must be organic and non-linear. That's where growth is. So what does the operating model of it look like? We have to work on spokes. And the first thing, the spokes that we have to do is we have to first understand what are the attributes or patterns of that value communications process. Hold that thought. We're going to go around and identify the spokes of the wheel first. But for right now, we just want to understand that there has to be structure. There has to be structure to organize this so that we can go and map it back into how the company is organized. If we're unable to do that, none of this will work. This also won't work if you're not using the outcome wheel to understand or organize your information. The other thing about that then is, so how do we help figure out what an operating model looks like? This is a super simplistic version of it. You have designing the execution fabric, you have input raw materials, you have output, and your output is either going to be a random act or a measurable contribution. You're either going to be producing activities under the fail, or producing actions, tools that people can take action against. And here's the deal. You can test that stuff out with your teammates. Will it get them to take action? Ask them to take action, to ask them to use some of the things or apply some of the things that you're doing. All the things that you're doing, you should be creating to make your job easier. Guess what? Those are the things that are going to be valuable to Acuvia. Not you trying to think about what it is to do. Just do. Do the things that you need to do. Build the tools you need to do in order for you to take action. It's all about taking action. Okay, so now we're talking about the spokes. Here's the exercise. What do you think I could do to make these connections clear? And how much of it matters to make you successful? All right, now the next part is we're going to break down and achieve end state. What are we talking about with achieve end state? What does that mean? Well, really what it is about what's the idea? What's the thing? And you can't talk about an achieved end state unless you really work on what that one thing is. And that one thing isn't going to be clear unless we can say, here's your from what and here's your to what. So the achieved end state is the to what. And by the way, you got to play around with the to what. You got to write it out. You got to live it, or love it, learn it. But you also have to go from the complex. So for us, our job is to take things to move from complex to cohesive. By the way, cohesion, the word itself isn't elegant, but when you are in cohesion, people are experiencing elegance. And when you work to make things clean and simple, you are being elegant, and that's an experience that everybody will know when you're getting there. When you have too much weight, when you don't have your slides designed right, it's not elegant. You have to interact with people and get the crap kicked out of your stuff and think it through many, many ways in order to get it elegant. We have to embrace conflict. The creative conflict is what allows us to create beautiful things, beautiful pictures um, that look elegant. I'm not going to call the outcome wheel or the orchestration orb elegant yet. I definitely think the outcome wheel is elegant. What do you think so far? Because there's more elements to do it. But the whole first bucket is about from what to what. It's not like I mean, obviously you have to simplify this into one simple phrase, but there's a whole body of work just to do the first blue ball. How do you make this achieved end state clear? If you've been working on the Omnitrax one, share with your teammates what you struggle with about the achieved end state, because we were very, very clear. We were more clear about what the achieved end state needed to be for Omnitrax than we are being at Acuvia. We just lost sight of that. Why do we lose sight of what the achieved end state is? Why is that always a challenge? It's a human nature thing. And the more we lean into it and embrace that we struggle with it, the more rapidly we're going to create tools for our clients. The achieved end state also has to be aware or informed of how difficult that change is going to be in the first place. So this picture of Norton making the bridge cross is exactly the change management process that you go through. Halfway through, people are going to be really, really scared on this rickety bridge because they can't go this way, and they sure as shit don't know how far it is to get to the end state either. So they're going to freak out. And this always happens. All we need to be doing is laying the planks here, and it becomes easier, because if the effort to get here was less anxious, then the distance that they have to travel here is less. And that makes all the difference in the world. So what do you think I could do to make the connections clearer about what we're sharing so far, just in the spokes? Or for the achieved end state. Okay, let's talk about executive owner. Executive owner, we have a lot of tools that we leverage. There's the stakeholder map, altitude levels, and agreement networks, and talking through who's going to do what. Identifying an executive owner is not easy. It's not remotely close to as easy as people think it is. Oh, just go sell it to the CFO. It doesn't work that way, gang. The business problems that exist cut across multiple silos. And that's going to be true for anybody that's got a strategic accounts program. Any company that we're going to sell to, there's not going to be one simple executive owner. And then on top of that, that executive owner has to have the right profile. They have to be a change agent in upon themselves. So figuring out who that is, figuring out the messaging that's going to resonate with them are all critically important. And it can't just be the rigid business language, because that won't move the needle. It won't inspire them. These people have to be inspired. So the messaging has to be in their language. It has to be emotive, but backed by quantitative action. So you have to build it like really hard for the quantitative part, and then you have to work really hard to make it accessible, to make it inspirational. Okay, exercise 2. What do you think I could do to make the connections clearer? How much and how much of it matters to make you successful? Next element in the spoke, high-level initiative. High-level initiative. So what we're saying is, one element of the spoke is you've got to be able to communicate an achieved end state, but there's a lot of work to do that. To an executive owner, and this might be multiple, framed as a high-level initiative. Not and here's our technology, go buy it. Not, here's a training program, go buy it. And now this is going to get you there. You got to factor in the things that they require to be successful, and then the role you can play. The things they require to be successful, the role you can play. When you think that way, you can write high-level initiatives. So what's interesting is we know that a high-level initiative, in order for an executive to buy into that, there have to be 5 pieces of it. A conceptual model. How much modeling are you doing to figure out how your piece parts come together? How much of a model are you working on to figure out how clarity or concepting or detangling or architecting or capabilitying fit into our model? What about a process map? What are the sequence of events to go through? Are those linear process steps? Are they fluid process steps? Are they the same? Will they look the same for you as the rest of your teammates and what I will put together? What skills are required to execute this? How do you make it tangible what those skills are? How do you help our client figure out whether they have those skills or not? What does this solution schematic look like? How do these pieces fit together? What comes first? Or what are combinations that can come first? How will the client achieve ongoing value? These are all questions to be always pondering. And when you're able to do this, you're able to get a high-level initiative approved. Now, there are some other characteristics to factor in too, like project management methodology or messaging, those kinds of things, all of which can easily be practiced. You can take a book out and model it out. All of this is knowable and doable. We just have to do it. The other thing that's interesting is these outcome patterns, these resonate a lot. I still think we can do more to make these more immediately recognizable. But what we're saying is, look, there's 6 common patterns of what initiatives look like. Guess what? They're all going to have their own look and feel. If you go and look at McKinsey projects or started out McKinsey here and maybe trickle down here to, maybe like, I don't know, Wipro projects, but all going across the board, you're going to see each of these have their own natural flair, their own style. They do not follow the same process. They don't follow the same template, but yet these are all called projects because the people running these things don't have additional vocabulary. These are knowable things. The other point that I'm making is look how many derivative works can be built just off of these things. They're all built off of the outcome wheel. So this is why the outcome wheel is so elegant, or one of the reasons why it's so elegant. Look at this. Boom, 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 boom. We're able to provide very clear, clean patterns with crisp definitions that people can go, oh, the example, that resonates with me. So what do you think I could do to make these connections clear? Those connections in initiative, and how much of it matters to make you successful? First part is what do you think I should be doing to make these connections more clear? Second part, how much of it matters to make you successful in your role? Okay, hopefully you're seeing how we're coming around. We're first pair, blue and blue. I wonder what that is. Whatever. We're here to talk about measurable result. So what tools do we have that are related to measurable result? Well, we have the value equation, and this is the way for Acuvia to measure their combination of what they're communicating. Wait a second. What's going on here? How can we have measures? I'm so confused. Well, that's the thing. Going through this whole achieved in state process, we want to lift out the 5. See, there's only 5. Look at that. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5 reasons a company should invest. Measurable result. These 5 reasons over here would be the 5 critical success factors. They're going to be the same. They won't look the same because they'll be called something different. They'll just be translated because at this stage, you want to believe. In this stage, you want to measure. So you have to write things differently, but they all can combine. And this is an example of a value map with business drivers on it. We have to learn a lot more how we're making these connections. These connections only happen if you're, yes, writing stuff down and engaging and really trying to work hard to make things simple. And this is why it requires a disciplined approach of using the outcome wheel and seeing how many parts can you answer. If you can't answer them, that's good because you know that's where you need to put your focus on. If you can answer them, that's also good. Shut up and quit dwelling on that part if you can write up a good statement here. If not, you have to go do more work. It's that simple. What do you think I could do to make measurable result connections clearer? How much of it matters to make you successful? Okay, the next part, impacted stakeholders. This is the second orange and orange. I wonder how they're related. Do you wonder how they're related? I hope so. Because in the impacted stakeholders part, what you're worrying about are people who have domains, who are responsible for domains, and people who have processes. If we've understood the achieved end state well, and we understand, and we have the success factors here, and we understand what the requirements of the initiative need to be and what the mission will be, it's going to be very clear all of a sudden how many stakeholders are going to be involved and where there's going to be conflict with them. If you just go through the matrix of how the impacted stakeholders are organized. If you're not paying attention to the matrix, or that there's no incentive for these people to work together, we're never really going to be able to help much on the impacted stakeholders part. The other thing that we've highlighted out is what do these people, we call navigating all this stuff an agreement network. How do you do that? Well, we have to create clarity. There's that word, clarity, all throughout. We have to be able to create clarity of what's in it for each one of these people. How do we create a shared language across the board here? How are we going to do that when a networking person and a systems operations person, both, and an applications person, all three think they're doing security? How is that possible when you also have other security requirements? How are you going to talk to those people? Let alone somebody in finance who has a different set of security requirements or compliance requirements. Compliance doesn't necessarily equal security. You have to be curious about what those things are. How do you connect the language? How do you get buy-in for across all of these different people? How do you drive momentum? There's that word. What does momentum mean? We have to be aware of what these things are. We're just not going to be able to affect the change and managing it. We're literally living this right now. Executive owner, impacted stakeholders. What are we doing to create the tools these people need to be able to navigate this? And then what does collaboration actually look like? It means, from my lens, making things that people can react to in structured ways. Are we helping our clients think through their own internal change management process so they don't get ahead of themselves? What's the core team? Who are the peers? How do they go figure out the buying committee? We're there, guys. What do you think I could do to make these connections clearer about impacted stakeholders and how much of it matters to make you successful? Okay, over a life cycle. What does this mean? Over a life cycle is, how do you help set the client's expectations about what these things look like over a period of time? here's a core construct. We break down from the impacted stakeholders stage here, the 3 different groups that you're making the sales to: the team, peers, buying committee. See those 3? Look at this. 1, 2, 3. Each one of these different groups are going to have different what's in it for them. There's 3 phases. There's a consolidation phase, integration phase, innovation phase. These aren't standard. And by the way, it's not always going to look this way. This is just an example. And then there's what are a few goals here? Now, obviously, you'd want five impacts, reasons to buy for each one of these things, and laid it out. But sometimes it's just too much information, and you just have to make it more elegant. And then along the way, you just list out some simple projects that they need to follow underneath here. This tool helps people understand, we need to do this bucket here. We need to concentrate on doing these things. But by doing these things, they're going to allow us to do this stuff, and then to do this stuff. It's really that simple. You can't go and build a perfect plan. And I think that's one of the things that we have a paralysis on our team about. I need to see more of a detailed plan. And the more detail that you make the plan, the less likely you are going to be successful. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't need to be, totally opaque, but we've got to find ways to have you participate in your own planning process. So what do you think I could do to make these connections clear, and how much of it matters to make you successful? Okay, so we got some a now section in here about connections. So one of the things that we mentioned early on, I mentioned it as a sphere. This is a component within the sphere, so it's okay for it to be a cube. But what we're highlighting here is all of the messaging has to get triangulated at a moment in time. And the only way that I know real well to plot out coordinates of how to combine these elements is in this 3-dimensional cube. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the synthesis or the connection point of this information at the right moment in time. So we have a timely dimension. That's this axis. So when will they realize results? Where in their journey are they? When and where? That's what's covered in timely. Relevant is, what are their goals, or what are they looking to do? How will they achieve them? What and how? That's relevance. Just tell me what to do. Tell me how to do it. Be relevant to me. Be timely. When will I get results? Where are we engaging them in their journey? In context. Who is involved? So in context, to whom, for whom, why? Context, who? Why do they care? If you don't know who is involved and why they care, you're not going to be contextual. If you don't know what their goals are, how they will achieve them, you're not going to be relevant. If you don't know when they'll achieve results or where they are, you're not going to be timely. In order for a salesperson, or for us to be successful for that matter, we have to be timely, relevant, and in context. How does the outcome wheel help do that? How do you think? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to break this outcome wheel. We're going to take this representation over here, and we're going to use this little metaphor to represent it. So every time you see this, think this. Just know I have this as a frame of reference, but this is what's in the box here, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go around the outcome wheel. So we've got the atom level, the systems view, or system, the things that we have to think about in the systems part. And now, what do the spokes mean? What are the spokes connecting? So this spoke, this axis of our spoke, connects our relevant information. The achieved end state must be measurable. These 2 pillars, these 2 spokes must interoperate together. This is the connection point between the economic theory of value and psychology. Now, it's not binary. You have to make sure that you're toggling between both of these things back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The more you work on the measurable results and then go back and refine here, the tighter this becomes. The tighter this is, the easier this is. It's a continuous process of where this one makes this better, a positive feedback loop. Only if you're creating conflict in here to force the argument back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth to refine the achieved end state and the measurable result. If this is being filtered and constantly challenged, this becomes increasingly tighter and everything becomes increasingly easier. Yes, I know it's a messed up thing. The more conflict and the more argument you have, the faster this is and the easier it becomes. And the more we're driving these connections and leveraging these tools, there's a lot of tools we could be using if we have that kind of discipline and focus. What do you think I could do to make these connections, the axis part of the relevance connections, clearer? How much of it matters to make you successful? I have a hunch that we can't educate or do too much training on it because all the connections are going to be frayed and foggy. You have to do it. You have to do it. All right, now we have our next spoke, the context spoke. So we have this spoke, our relevant spoke. Now we have this spoke, the context spoke. So we have the executive owner and impacted stakeholders are 2 and 5. This is this is what we're concentrating here. These connect more with communication theory and sociology. There's a tremendous amount of communication theory for impacted stakeholders. There's a tremendous amount of sociology there. The executive owner needs to be able to harness these tools to be able to be effective. That's just simply what must happen. If these things aren't employed correctly, these people will mutiny and you'll get an act two mutiny, if you will, in terms of the change management process. So context and keeping people informed, giving them stuff, giving them slides to react to, having these people be engaged and involved and not idle. There's that statement, idle hands are the workshop of the devil. That can't be more true. You must always keep people busy doing things, because if not, they find time to complain. People suck. Got to be busy. You got to be busy. You got to be engaged doing things and creating conflict. And that means you have to be more curious. If you find yourself as an impacted stakeholder, you have to get curious about what an executive cares about. And the executive owner needs to be caring about here. We need to create more conflict between these two so we can make all of these tools better and better and better. The faster we create conflict, the better off. The more we avoid conflict, well, guess what? We run into conflict in our client site. There's always going to be conflict here. We have to recognize it. Our job is to have an idea of how to manage that complexity or that conflict. What do you think I could do to make these connections clearer? How much of it matters to make you successful? So our last spoke is our timely spoke. And I think this is going to be trippy because we're talking about time in a different way. This isn't the amount of time that you spend on something. This is time in a completely different lens. It's a duration time, a benefit time, a management of time, a management of resource of time, a management of unit of work. There's many, many variables here on the timely part. And they really come down to this axis. How do you frame out what actually an initiative is? You can't define an initiative unless you define tasks and the unit of work. and how the work is going to happen. The work that we're doing is creative work with discipline behind it. If we're going to choose to follow other approaches, then we're not doing our work. And we have to find ways to talk about it and contrast it and be curious. The other thing that we have to get our arms around is that the work nature of the work is going to change in phases over a life cycle. It's not static. And we have to think about how to make things more adaptive and flexible and living, not static. And I know we want things to be static, like I do this and then that's and then I'm done. But that's not the reality of what a change of being a change agent is, nor is it the reality of driving change. So our clients aren't going to be able to experience that reality, nor are we. It's an impossibility because of the nature of the way work is. So this timely dimension here is, how do you frame this stuff out? There are systems thinking and experiential learning techniques that we have to be able to do to teach people how to achieve high level initiatives that they probably have never worked on before, and do it over a period of time, day by day by day by day. How does change happen? It happens every day, doing the right things every day and putting a box around it and recognizing, wow, during this one sprint of activity, we're so busy, we didn't realize we produced all of these things. Now you anchor that win, and then you work on scaling that win, and then you move forward. Pilot or build the prototype, limited production run, prepare for scale, and then scale. But you got to keep people busy so they don't realize that they're working on something. Then you have to tell them what you worked on, and then you have to help anchor what they did so they feel confident or they believe they actually did it in the first place. Then you can talk about scale. People skip scale and it blows up. These are the dimensions on this timely part. What do you think I could do to make these connections clearer, and how much of it matters to make you successful on the timely part? Okay, so one way to check whether or not something's elegant is as you put all your pieces together and you start looking at it, can you find harmony? Can you find other things to check your work against? Because that's ultimate. It's not first you build this, then you build that, then you do this. That's not the way it works. That's why it's represented as a wheel. You have to build enough in one area that you can make progress elsewhere. So what's interesting about this is these are 6 attributes of persuasion. So what we need to be able to highlight is, in this story, would we be able to communicate it with reciprocity? So how are you going to communicate the achieved end state with reciprocity? How are you going to demonstrate authority? I can guarantee you, if you're talking fluently, where you can connect across all these, you're going to come off authoritative with authenticity. Will somebody like it? Yeah. If you've done all this work, people are going to like what you produce because you've been thoughtful. Scarcity, will this be unique? Absolutely, you will stand out and be differentiated. Scarcity differentiated is a different way of the meaning of this part. Consistent, will you be consistent? Think cohesive. If you have built your messages across all of these different dimensions and argued it out with teammates and built it over a period of time. And will you be able to create consensus by factoring on all the things that we factored in? What do you think? Because that's what this is designed to do. How about this dimension? So these are the dimensions of persuasion, all the way going back to Aristotle. There's the ethos, the speaker. Are we appealing to? Is it? So yeah. So audience. So the pathos is the emotion. Ethos is your ethics. Like, does this seem right? Does it feel noble? The pathos is, does it make me want to move? And the logic is it sound? We have to triangulate and make sure our messages map to all of these different things. If you think about this dimension and you're checking your work in all of these areas, or we're checking our work collaboratively, imagine how easy it will be to triangulate and make sure the message is sharp in all of these areas. Again, this is another reason why having slides is so important, so we can vet them out. It's not about whether your slides are working or not. It's producing things that we can triangulate and organize into this overall recipe, this overall architecture. What about this? Once you have a story, once you have the elements of this, isn't it easy then to start plotting out how people will receive it? Why are we worrying about storyboarding it until we actually have the story elements to be able to do it? And that's really what's behind this building a possible outcome story. You have elements of here. You're going to need to use this to complete this. This is sort of like the business language to talk about it. This is how we translate it to get it into a story. What's the world? How would we set the, set the plot? The achieved end state would be the world, the setting, the value story. The executive owner might be the hero, but it still might be part of the plot, right? So you could see how these things all interweave together. This part here is the most difficult, the formula. This part here is the most fun, but you can't build a good one unless you've built these other things and unless you've built enough conflict. Conflict is what propels the quality of everything moving forward. The avoidance of making slides, the avoidance of conflict is sure enough the way to not produce high quality content. I know it's strange, but it's just the truth. It's what happens. Okay, so there's our outcome wheel. What do you think? Is it elegant? Why don't you use it? How would you use it? How do you get curious about how to use it? How could you create tools to help you use it? By the way, if you create tools to help you use it, guess what? You're going to be creating tools for other people to use it, probably within our clients. If you want to see your stuff get in front of clients, make tools following the outcome wheel. And then we'll introduce other ones to work from before. But the outcome wheel is so important because so much of all the work that we do is built off of this simple construct. I'm really looking forward to getting your feedback. Looking forward to getting your feedback on the last conundrum. Look forward to getting some responses back. Take care.